I will be discussing about the mechanism of tooth movements. There are important factors considered to be responsible for tooth movement. First to be discussed is the bone remodeling theory. According to this factor, the selective resorption and deposition of bone takes place during both eruptive and pre-eruptive phases of tooth movement around tooth germs. Intense metabolic activity in alveolar bone, which takes place around the moving tooth, requires the presence of dental follicle. Hence, dental follicle determines the position of tooth. Dental follicle has important role in coordinating bony changes around the erupting tooth. Dental follicle provides the source for new bone-forming cells. But it does not conclusively prove that only the follicle is responsible for tooth eruption. Bone remodeling around the developing tooth germ carries it actually. Dental follicle is considered to have an important role in bone remodeling, as it is the stimulating factor for osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts and osteoclasts are the cells that makes up the bone. The main difference between osteoblasts and osteoclasts is that osteoblasts is involved in the formation and mineralization of bones, whereas osteoclast is involved in the breakdown and resorption of bones. Absence of follicle hampers bone remodeling and stops tooth eruption. Many experiments have shown that actual movement of tooth towards the oral cavity is only possible when dental follicle is intact, no matter whether a tooth bud is present in the follicle or not. Next is the root growth theory. The root growth theory considers growth in root length to be responsible for tooth eruption, as the growing root presses against the socket base and opposite force pushes the tooth to erupt. After crown formation, there is formation of root. It involves cellular proliferation and formation of new tissues. These new tissues which are formed are accommodated by either movement of crown or resorption at the base of the socket. Advocates of the root growth theory of tooth eruption postulated the existence of a ligament called the cushion hammock ligament, straddling the base of the socket from one bony wall to the other like a sling. Its function was to provide a fixed base for the growing root to react against. But the structure described as the cushion hammock ligament is the pulp delineating membrane that runs across the apex of the tooth and has no bony insertion. It cannot act as a fixed base. The basis of this theory is questionable due to certain facts. First is, if the root formation results in an eruptive force, there is the requirement of a fixed base, but the bone at the base of the root cannot act as a fixed base as pressure on the bone results in its resorption. Sometimes, the distance traveled by an erupting tooth is more compared to the length of root formed during the same period. Next, rootless teeth also erupt, for example, the natal teeth, which are occasionally present in the oral cavity at birth, are always without root. And then, eruption can occur even after root formation is complete. The hammock ligament, this structure was considered to provide a fixed base for the growing root, as I have mentioned a while ago, so as to create an eruptive force, and it was thought to be located below that root, like a sling attached to bone on all sides. But now it is recognized that this structure either does not exist or it separates pulp from the dental sac and has no bony insertion. Lastly, after resecting root, it prevents further root formation but eruptive tooth movements continue. Root growth theory is now considered to be unimportant for tooth eruption, but it is true that root growth is necessary for eruption as it gives attachment to periodontal fibers.
Good day, I am Dr. Pamela Garcia, and we are here for the continuation of the topic about mechanisms of tooth movements. We have been acquainted with the first two factors, which are the bone remodeling and the growth of the root. Now we're going to talk about the hydrostatic pressure and the periodontal ligament traction theory. So we will go first with the hydrostatic pressure. The hydrostatic pressure is based on the fact that the dental papilla is vascular. Vascular pressure in blood vessels of papilla and fluid pressure due to retained water in the periodontal ligament causes teeth to erupt. Teeth move in their socket according to arterial pressure. By retaining water, ground substance may also swell, therefore creating pressure. But such pressures are not primary in tooth movement because if root and periapical vasculature are removed surgically, tooth eruption is still not prevented. This theory is not recommended now, as in the absence of blood vessels, tooth eruption still occurs. The periodontal ligament traction theory, among all the other theories that had been discussed, this is much more accepted because it has the strongest evidence in its favor. The periodontal ligament has an important role in maintaining tooth position. The transeptal fibers running between adjacent teeth across the alveolar process draw neighboring teeth together and maintain them in contact. As long as the periodontal ligament is viable, tooth movement occurs. The fibroblasts, by virtue of their contractile forces, exhibit fibronexuses. It is through these fibronexuses that the fibroblast transmits forces to the collagen bundles. These collagen bundles, apart from undergoing remodeling, are also inclined at the correct angle to bring about eruptive movement. The orientation of the fiber bundles, which is established by the developing root, is a basic requirement for tooth movement. The follicle, before it becomes the periodontal ligament, it also plays an important role in tooth eruption, although it does not provide the actual eruptive force. Basically, eruptive movement is brought about by a combination of events involving a force initiated by the fibroblasts. This force is transmitted to the extracellular compartment and to the collagen fibers via the fibronexuses. These fiber bundles, in proper alignment, bring about tooth movement by virtue of the ability to remodel. The removal of bone to create an eruptive pathway is also determined by the tissues. It is concluded that the force for tooth eruption is most probably generated by the contractile property of fibroblasts of ligament along with other conditions, which must be present so that this contraction can be used for tooth eruption. Another factor that can be included as a factor for your tooth movement is your mesial or proximal drift. Mesial or proximal drift involves a combination of two distinct forces resulting from occlusal contact of teeth and the contraction of the transeptal ligaments between the teeth. When the jaws are clenched, bringing teeth into contact, force is generated in a mesial direction as of the summation of cuspal planes, as many teeth have a mesial inclination. This can be shown in a number of different ways. When opposing teeth are removed, the rate of mesial drift is slowed, but it is not eliminated. These observations indicate that although an anterior component of occlusal force is responsible for mesial drift, it is not solely responsible. Transeptal ligaments run across the alveolar process in between the teeth, and it maintains the teeth in position. If a tooth is bisected, the two halves move away from each other, but if the transeptal ligament is previously removed, this separation does not occur. If the proximal contacts are disc to make room for mesial drift, the teeth begin moving to re-establish contact. But if the teeth are ground out of occlusal contact, the rate of drift is slowed. Therefore, it can be concluded that mesial drift is achieved by contraction of transeptal fibers and increased by occlusal forces. And that ends the lecture for the mechanisms of tooth movements.